No, it's not. Unfortunately, all Fnatic dropped out.
Okay, we'll get started again. I was told at the break that we have something like 60 people sitting in the live stream watching, which is really cool. So welcome to the live stream people. We're tossing a moderator in that chat, so hopefully we can even filter a couple of your questions into the conversation as we get to the Q&A. So this session is on teams and leadership, and we have a really terrific panel lined up of folks who have a really nice broad history, both in terms of the scene, but also the kinds of games and teams that they're leading. So I'm actually just going to let folks take a turn, introduce yourself, and perhaps say a few words about kind of what inspired you to take on a team, found a team, start directing and managing one. So we'll just start there.
Okay, hi there, I'm Alex. I'm Managing Director for SK Gaming, 34 years old, from Cologne, Germany. I'm not actually one of the starters of Schröd-Kommando, how we were called back in the days, 1997. I took over in 2000 together with Ralf Reichert, who's the CEO of Turtle Entertainment nowadays. My passion for gaming started in probably 1998 when I met Jens Hilgers, who's one of the founders of Turtle Entertainment as well. And we set up this plan of doing something in gaming, and we came up with the idea of the league and everything you see today. So I'm actually one of the 5 guys who founded Turtle Entertainment and made the swap to SK Gaming in 2005. Yeah, here I am, SK Gaming. I guess all of you know the team behind the company behind. You won't know that much, but you know the website for sure. That's where we are. We got 50 players on the contract right now worldwide. Doesn't matter to us if they're from Sweden, Northern America, Korea, Russia, whatever. And our goal is to win tournaments and have one of the largest communities out there in esports.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, my name is Leckey. I'm a student at Huddersfield University, and I was former manager of Four Kings up until about September when I got swine flu. I call that a day. Started working for Four Kings in about 2006, I think. Originally started out as a journalist. Before that and after that, I was running tournaments in Northern Ireland and in the UK, running leagues. Got into Four Kings as a favour, really, because I knew one of the managers and he needed a bit of a hand. So that's how I got involved.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi, my name is Bengtsson, and I'm from Sweden. I live in Gothenburg. I'm 26 years old, and I work as a guild leader for Insidia. Previously, I worked with mouse sports in Nihilum, another World of Warcraft guild. Yeah, I forgot the question.
Maybe start. What inspired you to?
Yeah, well, I've been playing games since I was really young. Since I was like 12, 13, something like that. And I started out as a player, just playing the games for fun. The same in World of Warcraft. I was not a guild leader when I started out. So after a while, it became natural. Like in the start when I was playing MMOs, I was like a player, like I just said. But like after a few years, it just felt natural to become like a leader because I had so much experience when I started in World of Warcraft.
Thanks. So I think one of the things that's really interesting about having you guys here, especially following the players panels, often when we talk about esports in the scene, of course the players are sort of the people we sort of see first on the front line, but there's this whole organization and structure often behind to make things happen. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what is the work involved in managing teams and managing players, and that can be everything from the nitty-gritty details to, I was really provoked by Jonas's comment about socializing new players into becoming pro and being on a team. So can you talk a little bit about the work you do to manage players?
Sure. Well, the day-to-day working field we have is that of a small company. So we have to take care of several parts that are vital for SK Gaming. One is, of course, we need to get money in. We need to get sponsorships in. We need to get advertisement in. And this money, we need to distribute it to players, to our goals, to see, okay, SK Gaming is where we want it to be. It takes a lot of administration behind. If you run players, you need to send them to tournaments, you need to make travel plans for them, you need to make sure they have a practice schedule, you need to make sure they get all the equipment that you want them to have, from sponsors especially. You need to make sure they understand what's the message that we give out to other gamers, that our sponsors want you to give out. That's just one part of all we do. On the other hand side, you have to make sure that you understand the gaming market and where it's going. So what are the chances for the future? Where do you want to take this company to? What are the next games? Which are the next players you should try to sign? What are the leagues? What are the tournaments you should go? Anything that's coming down to these arguments is something that you have to look up on, besides running the company actually.
Okay. One of you?
On top of that, I suppose, every day, talking to the players and make sure they're comfortable in the situation where they are at that time, and speaking to them and trying to plan out events throughout the year where the players want to be, and giving them goals to achieve. And some managers take a very hands-on approach with players in terms of setting up practice schedules and making sure they're practicing when they should be, and things like that. And as well, say there's a new player to the team, you got to get them, or who's maybe new to the sort of the professional side of gaming, making sure he knows the protocols essentially.
Yeah, well, it's really important to keep everyone happy, to keep them motivated, and to strive for the same goal, which can be kind of hard at times. For example, in Cydia we have 35 players, and that's 35 players with different ideas, different thoughts, and they might want different things. So it's really important to mold them all together to one unit to make everyone work towards the same goals.
I mean, the follow-up question, it may vary a bit given the nature of your teams and your experience. I mean, how much is what you're doing also sort of coaching? And I mean, I know, Thomas, you sort of have it playing alongside of. Can you speak to this issue of that side of managing players? And is coaching an important role, or is that sort of fall out and this is sort of the business side of things?
Yeah. Well, I guess for me it's a bit different than from esports, since we don't really have coaches, like the leadership. Myself, for example, I'm also playing with the players. So like in esports, the coaches, they stand on the outside and help them outside the game. But in MMOs, it's really important, like for the leader to like lead by example within the game. The leader should be one of the better players in the guild, for example. So everyone takes after that player, for example.
In terms of coaching in esports, it's not what it is in football. Jonas was saying earlier, but there's more of a team captain role, and he's the guy who sets out the strategies. As far as coaching is it's more like cheerleading at the moment. You try and get behind your team and give them a bit of a spur, and make sure they're focused and their heads don't drop. At ESL Pro Series UK finals, I remember, we had a team of staff down for the Counter-Strike Source final, and we had a very, very young team. I'd never been on stage with the cameras on. They managed to get their way to the final, and they said afterwards what kept them going was the crowd and was the encouraging talks of the Four Kings staff that were there, which when you hear that coming from a player, you think, good, then we've done a good job. So.
I think if you try to narrow it down, then skill-wise, players and teams at the top level, they equalize sometimes. You have days where the difference between Team A and Team B is huge, and there's no way Team B can win. But then you have these moments where they are quite close to each other, and then I think it comes down to getting the right emotions out of the players. And that's where an outstanding person, like not in terms of quality, but in terms of he's standing behind the team or behind the player that's in the tournament right now, can have his role. And that's what I try to do if I go with the teams. I try to be with them throughout the tournament, because a tournament has its own psychology. Like if you play a group stage match, you may lose it, that's fine. If you play a quarterfinal, you must win. If you play a semi-final, you must be better than in the quarterfinal, because most of the times you meet opponents which are better than the round before. So you need to build up this pressure inside to be better from one game to the other. And some players just need this to be visible before their eyes. They need to understand, okay, here's where you are right now, that's where you want to go. You need to understand this. Your A game, it's not in the semi-finals or in the quarterfinals, it's in the very final. That's what coaching in esports, I think, nowadays is all about. Because the players themselves, usually they have the skill. They have everything they need to win a tournament. That's how they enter the tournament. But bringing them to this very point sometimes needs a coach. We had moments where we played a third place decider after we lost a semi-final. And that's one of the crucial points, because the team is down. It didn't enter the final, and 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, they need to play a deciding match. And sometimes you have these tournaments where third place decider means you get 0 cash, or you get your hands on 10,000 US. So, I mean, sometimes the team doesn't realize, because they're so disappointed from the semifinal. They just play and play, and you know they lose the first half, and then you talk to them and say, yeah, you know, just play like that. That's okay. You just give these guys 10,000. That's the way you want to go, and then you realize, okay, this team is building up again. They try to avoid losing this match, and that's when you realize, okay, you told them something right now. They didn't know, they didn't understand, even though it's obvious. But sometimes a team or a player doesn't understand the situation, and that's where coaching, from my perspective, kicks in.
In some instances, though, particularly with Halo, I mean, a lot of Halo teams, particularly the UK and Europe, I don't know about America, but will have a coach alongside them. You know, they'll be in with the voice comms, and they'll be relaying information to every one of the players. I don't know why this hasn't caught on in other genres and other games, but that seems to, you know, to benefit them. They're lively people. They do get into it, and you know, a lot of the top teams. SK Gaming had a Halo 3 team with a coach. So, you know, it really does depend on the game, right?
Tobias, do you think of yourself as a coach in the past or currently, or?
Well, yeah, kind of. Well, it's more like a playing coach, since I'm actually there playing with them at the same time. So, but I mean, it includes everything as a normal coach. I mean, you have to motivate everyone, and sometimes there can be really rough times. Like I said, like if you lose in the semi-final, it's the same for us. Like if we don't get the world first, then everyone is totally demotivated. People might even want to quit the game. So then it's really important to like try to push everyone and motivate them.
Perhaps gets this, because I think one of the things I was curious to have you maybe unpack or talk a little bit for us about was the real challenges in managing players on your teams, both because, I mean, you may have different kinds of players. I mean, so maybe your team has the Warcraft player and the Counter-Strike team, and so there's sort of different players and personalities, and also ages. I mean, I'm thinking too how often people in the esports scene can be young, and how you're sort of dealing with young people. And so what are some of the real sort of challenges you face in actually managing players on teams?
Just as you said, if you have a real young player, he doesn't understand a lot about the tournaments and what it needs to get to the top and to stay on the top, actually. He's so hungry to get there for the first time, that's all he can think about. So you got to take care that, you know, he takes his time getting there and being able to sustain this position, being on top, staying on top for the next couple of tournaments. So you think long term with young players. With older players, like our FIFA players, I don't have to teach them anything. Like Dennis and Daniel Schellhase, they are so experienced in FIFA. They won the first World Cup in 2003. And ever since, you know, they entered the finals. Both of them have 2 World Championships. If they play the World Cyber Games this year in Los Angeles, I mean, what can I tell them to get into a final? There's nothing I can tell them. I can only cheer them up. So that's a very, very different scenario than a very young player, unexperienced. On the other hand side, if you compare those two, Dennis and Daniel with Shane Hendrickson, our Quake Live player, Shane is, I'd say, still new to the scene. But still, the way he plays, the way he understands the tournament and everything that's going on, he's extremely smart, and for his young age, and for not being around that long compared to other players, he's probably mentally one of the strongest players out there. So it all comes down to the character himself, or to the team. Some teams need you from the outside, some teams don't want you from the outside, and they don't need you. It really differs from player to player, from team to team. You can't say, okay, this is the formula. You need to get a feeling for it. You need to understand, does a player, does a team need you or not?
I think it does depend, again, on the game and the format of the game. Like if you have a Counter-Strike team, the needs of each player are very similar. Whereas if you have one squad of a lot of 1v1 players, like FIFA or Trackmania, for example, you know, they all want they all have their individual needs. Even though they are in a team, they are in their squad, they practice together, they train together, they do have their individual requirements. So there's a lot more work involved. If you have a large squad of 1v1 players, there's a lot more work in, you know, trying to figure out what they want. Whereas with Counter-Strike and Source and Call of Duty, for example, generally speaking, you know, they all want more or less the same thing and require the same needs and speak as a group. Whereas that doesn't happen with the 1v1s. So.
Yeah, in World of Warcraft, in our guild, for example, the average age is probably a lot higher than it is in esports. I think the average age is probably around 25. So it might not require as much babysitting as it does for them. So yeah, and I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the other interesting questions too is, I mean, how do you go about finding new players? So are you actually sort of scouting, or you know, how are you seeding new people on your team? Are you watching for new talent, or?
Yeah, well, we actually scout a lot, but normally we put out a post on our webpage where we're looking for certain people. Of course, we write what we're looking for, what we expect of them, and everything like that. And we also, like, if there might be some friends in the guild, some friends to players in the guild, which are good, and then we might give them a tryout.
You can normally find players and teams based on their track record of having already competed in tournaments. So you know their standards almost, and watching their games. There have been instances though where I have gone to an event and had to scout out a team in Counter-Strike Source, again with the new sort of team who weren't really into pro gaming at that stage. They did win the ESL Pro Series after we picked them up, and that was based off the fact I did go down to the I-35 event in Coventry, I think it was, and you know, spoke to the players. They were all very young. I think the youngest player was 16, a Spaniard, and so yeah, there is instances where I have had to scout because it's such a new team. But you know, I think they knocked London Mint, one of the CGS franchises, out of the upper bracket and got themselves into, you know, 5th place in the tournament or something with 2 CGS franchises involved. So they were very happy with the way they performed, and you know, they could hang there with the big boys, so to speak. And we brought them in, and we tried to nurture that, and they went on and done fantastic things, and a lot of the players are still around playing now at the top of their game. So you know, it does happen.
Are you guys scouting?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, we have, let's say, a huge network of people that we trust. We trust their opinion, and sometimes we follow, sometimes we don't. We have lots of people trying to send us emails and say, hey, I'm this kick-ass player, please give me a contract. Usually we simply delete these messages because it's too many, and you know the big players or the good players out there. But there are situations like Carmack could tell about Quake Live. When we were looking for a good player for Quake, it was actually Carmack, who was working with SK back in the days, who talked a lot to Quake players, and especially to 04, who recommended Rafa and said he's going to be the next world champion. And that's something, you know, that's an opinion. I didn't have the opinion, nor anybody else inside of SK Game, inside the organization, didn't know about this player at that point. So he was introduced to us. He was put on the roster, and you know, he developed way faster than we could possibly think. On the other hand side, we had Alice, our leader from the female Counter-Strike team. Even though we always said don't send us emails, we don't read it. She sent an email and asking for support back in 2006. And the reason why I actually looked up this email was a couple of weeks before there was a documentary on MTV in Germany, and they had a documentary about this team, how they won the World Cup 2 years ago. And her name popped up on this email, and I remembered it from the documentary, and I put 2 and 2 together, and then that's how we signed them actually. So it comes down to when we are actively looking for players, we have a network of people that we trust their opinions, and then we make the call. But sometimes players, they just approach us, and they really want to be on the roster, and that's fine as well.
Yeah.
But if you're a young gun, usually if not the top player of the days is saying he's the next Heaton, Spawn, 04, Cooler, whatever, then we wouldn't go for it.
Yeah. So you can't imagine a model in esports where there'd be something like farm teams or sort of semi-casual guild in which people are getting checked out, watched, groomed, if you will.
We did that in, I think, 2006 with a Warcraft team in Germany. We were always famous for playing the ESA Pro Series in Germany, and with Mew, we have, I think, 7 times or 6 times champion, 6 times, I guess. So we had a bunch of 4 or 5 young players, age of 15 to 16, that we wanted to bring into the German Pro Series and see how they develop. One of them was Daniel Spence, I think, X-Lord. He won the Pro Series afterwards, so I couldn't say, because of us taking him into SK, he became one of the Pro Series winners afterwards. But I think it's a good way for young players to understand how a team works, what's required, what do I have to do to gather experience. So yes, we went this way, but it's also, we are a small enterprise. We got to look where we put resources, and a team that you need to babysit, as Ian just said, that costs some resources. So we'd rather not do it today.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have done that, or had done that to a certain extent with certain smaller games that look like they might have a future in esports, particularly with Trackmania Nations. It was just before it had been announced as a World Cyber Games title, and again before it was announced as a ESL Pro Series UK title. I'd sort of started playing it, and I think semi-finals of ESL Major Series or something in the UK. So I began to know some of the players and their standards, a lot of the top players. So we had the unique ability to come in and pick the best players in the country before anyone else had even thought of Trackmania as a potential esport. It already had its sort of day in the SWC, but then that stopped, and it sort of dwindled again. But yeah, that was a huge advantage in picking up those players, because then the demand was pretty high for Trackmania, because it's a small game. It doesn't cost a lot to support, and it's a World Cyber Games title, so it always looks good to the sponsors if you've got World Cyber Game qualifiers and wins on the sheet. So. Yeah.
What about a farm team guild? Has it ever been?
Yeah, well, the difference in World of Warcraft is that you actually need items to perform at a high level. So we can't just take anyone, since they won't have the required gear to perform as good as the member in our guild. So it's almost impossible for us to take people that aren't in other top guilds, for example. So yeah.
So you can't imagine sort of having a guild in which you're skilling people up, equipping, gearing them up for the...
We've never tried it. I don't think it would be possible.
I think Fnatic, they have a broader base for that. I think it's called the Academy.
Okay.
They do recruit young players or players for titles which are not top-notch tournament-wise, worldwide, but they put a lot of resources into that, I think.
I mean, I think Ian, you sort of touched on it. It's an interesting question about, how do you as a team also decide how you're going to grow in terms of titles you want to start covering, which kinds of players, which kinds of titles, perhaps, is it going to move from just raiding to, you can start doing arena stuff. How do you make those strategic decisions about what you're going to invest in?
Well, I mean, right now we're in the middle of an interesting phase, because we have Warcraft 3 on the one hand side, and we got StarCraft 2 coming up on the other hand side. So what you can see within a lot of teams is that they dropped most likely all of their Warcraft 3 players to build up resources for StarCraft 2. So it is a transition phase right now, and you don't go for it like, okay, our strategy is beginning of 2010, we cut this, and then on the 11th of November in 2010, I'm going to sign these players, because you depend on other factors as well. You need to look for, is there tournaments out there that make sense signing a player? What kind of budget would you need for a player? It all comes down to a variety of arguments that you need to consider to make a call. On our side, I would say that we probably could have ditched Warcraft 3 4 or 5 months before we actually did it. Economically, it would have been wise. We didn't, because of a community argument on our side and because of the contracts we have with players. But at the end of the day, you rely on a lot of arguments from the outside as well. And in terms of new games, they need to develop. Like for us, StarCraft 2, yes, it's going to be one of the major titles in the future. But the moment SK will sign a StarCraft 2 player to have him professionally playing for us, I don't know yet. I mean, could be in 2010, could be in 2011. We're not going to rush into that.
So you're not out in the beta right now, sort of scouting or watching, or?
Well, you know the potential candidates, and I had a good dinner with Grubby yesterday. No, you just check the game, but the way StarCraft 2 is played in a beta is way different from what we're going to see in tournaments in 12 months from now. The game is going to shift so much. You can't say for sure if that's a middle, long-term strategy that you have right now, signing this or this player. So you just have to wait, actually.
With picking up titles to support, it very much depends on how long you think the title will actually be around as an esport. I mean, there's games that have come and gone in the blink of an eye, and there's a new game up and coming sort of now, Heroes of New Earth, which is having a lot of money put in by the developers. But again, nobody knows how long it's going to last, because there are a lot of similar titles. You've got Dota, LOL, it's called, and this Avalon Heroes, and they're all essentially the same game, but just different heroes and sort of slightly different elements. So it's hard to determine which one of those is actually going to overtake the other, and whether they will continue to have money put in for tournaments, and how long it's going to last. So there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done before you just think, right, I'm gonna pick up this title because there's one tournament in a couple of months. If it stops there, then it's a waste of money and a waste of time.
I mean, our only focus right now is World of Warcraft, but for us it's more, we're scouting maybe for new games, but like the last 5 years there hasn't really been an MMO that compares to World of Warcraft. When there was, when we heard about other MMOs, we thought maybe we should swap to this game. So it might become really big, but it never really happened. It's always been World of Warcraft, so I guess we'll see in the future if there is another game. If something becomes bigger than World of Warcraft, then we'll probably swap to that game, for example. And one thing about recruitment for us, I mean, our players doesn't have contracts. They just play because they enjoy the game. So, I mean, we can recruit a lot more freely. We can just take in 10 guys, let's give them a chance, and then we might kick 7 of them just like that. And 3 might be good enough, so it's probably a lot easier for us to recruit than it is for the esports companies.
Probably World of Warcraft is a good example, because there's a lot of trial and error in teams. I mean, Insidia is, if you look at it, it's an offspawn from Nihilum, Mouse, SK8.
Yes,
so
exactly.
there's a past actually behind it. There was one point when we believed that World of Warcraft and the whole approach of a guild and first kills would be something that means something in esports. But later on we realized it doesn't. So the strategy, it lasted probably 4 to 5 months within SK Gaming. And then we focused on the arena part, on the 3-on-3, because it's easier for us to handle. There were tournaments out there. It was more or less the esports structure we were used to. Same with StarCraft. I mean, everyone in here probably knows that we got a pretty bloody nose signing some StarCraft noobs, and everybody was laughing at us. We didn't have the knowledge. We went into the market. We tried. we thought we had some good ideas, we didn't. You know, and it's trial and error sometimes. Most of the times you succeed if you're good at what you do, but sometimes it looks pretty stupid. You know, and I can understand that people might have their opinion on the whole Insidia, SK, mouse sports thingy, how it went, but from the dynamics behind, it was the right calls at the right time. So getting new games in, you just try. Sometimes you just try.
I mean, I wonder too with the sort of new games question, how much of it is the game itself that the team says, you know, this is a great esport game, and it just, the mechanics, the rule set, the way it functions. How much of it is, you know, it's a popular game and the sponsors are gonna love having sort of, you know, more eyeballs coming through the website and things like that, and, you know, tournament structure. So what are those kind of, you know, factors, and does sponsorship play a role also in sort of the games that get picked up, or?
Absolutely. Above all, from our perspective, is you need to focus on your core. So, give you an example, we had Dota teams, and Dota is a huge community. The impact on the website, there was no impact. Even though we addressed the Dota scene with content, with one of the best teams, with everything you could provide, it, you know, Dota has its own universe, and you can't just drag it into an esports team like that. It didn't work. I think it didn't work for Meteor Makers, didn't work for Mouse Sports, didn't work for us, it didn't work for anyone. So that's a good example of a game which actually economically would make sense because you can drag a lot of attention to your brand. It didn't work. World of Warcraft was different. I mean, when we had the first kill with the SK guild, that had a huge impact on the website. And then the aftermath, putting up this the world ranking we still have on the website, that was played out very smart because we still get a lot of traffic from doing that back in the days. So you can actually say sponsors. I mean, we got a couple of those sitting here as well. They focus on the main games, and Counter-Strike is probably the #1 argument you have. If you enter other titles as well, then at least you need to be good, and you need to show some results that are, wow, this makes sense. When we were talking to Adidas back in 2006, the only argument that counted for them were the FIFA twins. I mean, Counter-Strike was the opposite of a positive argument for them. You know, we never mentioned, if you go with SK, you also go with these Counter-Strike guys. You couldn't do it in an official meeting. They knew, everybody knew, but you were simply not talking about it. So yes, sponsorship does play a role. Sometimes it pushes you into this direction or that direction, but at the end of the day, you need to narrow it down to the core of your brand, of what you want to be.
On the Dota point, one thing that I think MYM did do well is with the tournaments that they ran, I think that helped create the community within themselves for Dota, and they did have a lot of people going there purely for Dota, purely for the tournaments. So I actually think that's one thing that paid off for them. With respect to other games, well, I mean, you see the World Cyber Games picking up games purely because the sponsor wants them to. Whether you should incorporate that within your esports team model is another thing. I certainly wouldn't, because of what I said before, how long is it going to last? You know, there's no point in picking up a game for one tournament, two tournaments, and then it's going to stop and go away. And one game, Chiron 3D, you pick an esport team for Chiron 3D, you'll be the laughing stock of the world. You know, it's just not viable. It's not, you know, as Alex said, you know, Counter-Strike is the main one. You know the titles that work: Counter-Strike, Warcraft, Starcraft, Quake, and you know the titles that probably won't. So.
And it's interesting to see. I mean, the industry tried to push esport into Counter-Strike Source instead of Counter-Strike 1.6. They wanted to sell more games. They wanted to sell better hardware, new hardware. And it simply didn't work because the community didn't want Counter-Strike Source. In terms of esports, the game, well, how to say it polite, it sucks. If you compare it to 1.6, it's a very competitive game, even though some may say it's boring, but it's way more competitive than Source's. And we had a lot of leagues, a lot of tournaments trying Source, like the World Cyber Games did, this American organization did, forgot the name. CGS.
Yeah.
It simply didn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, Counter-Strike Source is a good game, absolutely, but the number one 5-on-5 or team game, FPS game, that's Counter-Strike 1.6. And it was interesting to see how they tried over the years to push Source and try to ditch 1.6 this way, but the community, the teams, it simply didn't work.
I think one thing with the Counter-Strike Source scene is it is a lot different than 1.8. I mean, both scenes hate each other. So although certain players, for one reason or another, have crossed over, Manja Capra, one example, the scenes don't genuinely like each other. So you've got the Counter-Strike model, but you've got two scenes within Counter-Strike 1.6 and Counter-Strike Source, and now they're trying to push through Pro Mod, which is, you're throwing another game in the mix. It's just going to divide the scene even more. They're trying to unite it with Pro Mod, but I don't think it's going to work. Because the game that is still, they've been trying to put a death clock on 1.6 for years and years, and it's still here, it's still the major esports game as far as I'm concerned. And Source can't really live up to that. Although, to be fair to Source, it does have its events calendar. It does have events. I was at 3 last summer. France, twice in Belgium, and again with the ESL Pro Series in the UK. Its primary game is Counter-Strike Source and Call of Duty. It's recently added 1.6, but it hasn't done so well in the UK because a lot of players did swap over. So the UK has a pretty diabolical 1.6 scene at the moment, which is a shame to see. So yeah, the main game there is probably Counter-Strike Source and Call of Duty. So personally, we need to support the UK scene. So we have an obligation to support these teams.
Thomas, is this a conversation you have with your sponsors about sort of where to go with the brand and with the teams? Or?
Yeah, well, for us it's a bit more simple. I mean, it's all about the community for us. I mean, we're not doing any tournaments. We're not trying to win anything. I mean, it's all about world firsts. And there hasn't really been a chance for us to expand into new games since there hasn't been anything that's been big. So we're still trying. I mean, it would be awesome if there is another MMO that's big as well, but right now it's just Blizzard is just dominating everything with World of Warcraft.
I wonder if we can spend another minute talking about sponsorships and sort of the challenges teams face with sponsorships and, this, the perhaps tension between sort of pulling in technology sponsors versus trying to branch out and get something called lifestyle sponsors and how, teams work with sponsors and some of the challenges you face. So can you talk a little bit about your relationships with sponsors and how you're developing that and maybe what some of the biggest challenges or issues are?
Well, if you come from the hardware perspective, it's quite easy. Our brands, or most of the brands, are known to the sponsors that we talk to. Networks were built since probably 1998 when we first talked to these guys about leagues, tournaments, websites, all these brands out there. So there's a common knowledge of esport within the hardware scene, and there is companies out there like SteelSeries who emerged from esports and became a huge company just because of esports in the whole market. And if you want to attract lifestyle or bigger companies, let's talk Coca-Cola, let's talk Nike, Adidas, whatever, then you have one obstacle, which is probably, it's known, but people don't think about it that much. We are a hidden champion. Meaning the numbers we produce in terms of advertisement, they are huge, they are big already. And we have a nice target group. You can say, okay, I want to have the 17-year-old male in France, the guy that just decides on his very first car, for example. And you have a huge number of these people on your website that you can attract with a nice ad. If it's put out the right way, I think it'll work. It will put a lot of attention onto your brand. But people don't know you within these brands. You need to establish the network. All of us need to talk, like the leagues, the tournaments, all the other teams, they need to talk to these brands so they get an understanding for what's happening. They need to attend shows, events, anything like that to being sucked into this market to understand, okay, these are the emotions behind this is what I can put to my brand, and they don't need these multi-billion budgets behind, like they need for a campaign rollout on TV, print, cinema, whatever it is. Esports is still small, but the numbers we produce are larger than most people think. The reaction I usually get when I talk about what I do, whether it's in my personal life or if it's a professional, people come to me and say, hey, I didn't have a clue that was existing. And the second is, I had no clue it was that big already. That's always what you hear from people. It's always the feedback you get. And once you are at this level, you can start convincing people with good strategies, good ways of placing advertisement, working together, good, smart ways of partnerships. You need to build it up from scratch. I mean, when we first signed Intel in, I don't know, 2001 probably, or 2000, we were so happy getting CPUs and mainboards from Intel. And when we had Elsa as a graphic board sponsor, I mean, the players within Schroed Commander back in the days, they were so happy having the latest and greatest graphic boards, not having to buy them. And the next year when we signed the first budget, like everybody was freaking out. We get travel support, we get this paid, and that's only 10 years old. And now we are at a stage where we can pay players on a regular basis. So if we take it to lifestyle now, it will take us 5 to 10 years. I mean, yes, we are out there, and a lot of tournaments, a lot of leagues do marvelous things to esports nowadays. The way they, put out the show, stream it, have these events, that's just phenomenal. And that will speed up the whole process. But still, we have to go out there and convince these people. And that's not something you do within 1 year, 2 years. It takes time.
Other sponsorship experiences or?
Well, yeah, it is extremely difficult convincing the lifestyle brands that esports is viable and that we do have a genuine business model. But yeah, one way of doing that is keeping contact with them and keeping them up to date, I think, with what's happening. And who knows, down the line maybe they will come to an event with an exhibition or something like that. I mean, Red Bull have taken an interest now and then with purely product sponsorships, but it's good to see such an established company making, having an interest in esports. And one thing that we did well, we were sponsored for a while by a company called New Trend, who were a product supplier to the Olympic Games, and they developed products for cyclists, and it was like energy bars and protein bars and drinks and shots and whatnot. And they took a huge interest because they did see it as a sport. So I'm hugely thankful for them of actually taking the gamble and going with us. They even had their product on sale at a couple of UK events because it was a massive LAN party over like 4 days, and they had lots of energy drinks on sale. So gamers love that kind of stuff. So yeah, but the obstacle's definitely there. It is easier with hardware because they have this identifiable link that, okay, gamers want the best hardware available, so this is obviously a market that we want to push the advertising into. But yeah, that's the two differences. One thing is it has been more difficult, I think, over the financial crisis, because a lot of companies have just slashed their marketing budget, and the majority of the income does come from company marketing budgets, and if that's being cut, whereas before they might have taken a gamble on an esports team to see how it works out as a trial period, they're not going to do that anymore if they have such a small budget.
What about your experiences with sponsorship and?
For MMO guilds, I mean, we're probably at the stage where esports was like maybe 5-10 years ago. If we contact sponsors, they don't really know what an MMO guild is. So it's extremely hard for us to find anything at all currently. We've had, lifestyle sponsors. That's probably out of the questions. But like, for example, if you see commercials for headset and mouses, you've never seen an MMO guild. It's usually like CS stars or something like that. So it's a lot more of a struggle for us.
I always think this is one of the interesting differences, of course, between the Korean scene and the American and European scene, is the way Korea seems to be able to pull in some lifestyle sponsors in interesting ways. But we have some good examples. I mean, MLG has been very successful North America, it seems, with pulling in the lifestyle brands. So.
It's a question of how does a society accept gaming.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 5-10 years ago, you couldn't have gone to a sponsor and say, hey, this is the new youth culture.
Mm-hmm.
They would have said, no, it's not. Rock concerts are, or these casting TV shows are. That's where the direction goes.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, if you go into any agency, they are so eager to learn about gaming because that's the new thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see a real push into the lifestyle direction as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it needs time, it needs information, it needs people to understand what we're doing, and it needs us to understand what do big brands need. On the other hand side, I mean, some of them are so professional, and if you are not making up to this, then you might lose them long term because they say, we can't work with them. We put so much resource in getting these guys in line, so it doesn't make sense for them to stick with you. That happens as well.
I think the reason why South Korea and China have these lifestyle brands being, investing in their scene is that gaming is socially acceptable there. In Europe, there's still the stigma attached to spending 8 hours a day on a computer. Your parents will just say, "Well, what are you doing? Go do your homework, or go outside and play football." They don't see the benefits of playing games. They don't see the benefits of esports. They don't see the fact that there's the same mental, cognitive processes involved in playing games as there is in playing a sport. You haven't got maybe the physical exertion, but you've got the mental exertion. Parents generally don't see the advantage of that. So yeah, that it's not socially accepted to the point where it is in South Korea and China yet. But with things like the Wii, it's not a great console, but it's getting people playing games. So it's getting people to understand what gaming is, and maybe that'll act as the gateway drug to get them on the bigger things. Who knows?
I want to make sure we have time for some audience questions as well. Is there yep, so can we, where did our wireless go?
Hi again. Talking about sponsorship and lifestyle sponsors, there was a big discussion in Russia regarding moral, because one beer company was providing quite a huge amount of money if our website would agree to promote it. Money was really good and discussion was very long because we would like to have this money. But in the end of the day, because of all these young people starting from 14, 12, we refused. What is your opinion about beer and alcohol and cigarettes coming into esports? Because sports can be considered linked with, for example, Carlsberg and football. It is promoted, although it's not very healthy. What's your opinion regarding this issue?
Well, I think you've just answered your own question. It is in football, and there's youngsters playing football, and there's youngsters interested in football, and I don't think it's had an adverse effect on that game, so I don't understand why it would have the same adverse effect on esports. At the end of the day, not everyone's going to go out and binge drink for a weekend if they see a Carlsberg advert on a gaming star shirt. The law is in place to prevent that, surely. So I don't see it as a problem at all, actually.
I see it a bit different, to be honest. I mean, the way they advertise in football nowadays, if you look at Champions League, for example, the main message is drink responsibly. It's not drink Carlsberg or drink Heineken, it's drink responsibly. So they go for the non-alcohol brands. And through those, they try to push, of course, the alcohol as well. It's out of the question. But the way they put out the advertisement is pretty much non-alcohol. That's what they try to do in terms of beer. I personally would have a problem with Marlboro or Camel or West approaching us and trying to give us a huge amount of money. Morally, I think we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't go for it, no matter what ridiculous amount of money they would throw at us, because long term it wouldn't pay off. That's what I'm quite sure of. A beer brand, what can I say? I'm German. We start drinking beer with 16, so we probably have a different approach on it. But also on the other hand side, I don't see the football comparison that much because our target group starts younger. When I was 16, yes, I was following big teams, but I was more into playing myself than following the big teams. Now that I'm older, I watch more football than I play. So I think the target group you reach when advertising in professional football, it's an older, more responsible target group than you have in esports. So from a moral standpoint, I would say, I guess no to beer, unless it's specifically non-alcohol, and they position their brand around non-alcohol, like a malt beer or whatever. That might make sense, but cigarettes, alcohol pops, or however it's called, it's too many problems attached to that, and I think our responsibility is too high to go in this direction.
Thomas, you were talking about how your age group is a little bit older. What about that? Carlsberg sponsors in City.
Yeah, but I mean, there's maybe the gamers, but people visiting the site are a lot younger. So I totally agree with Alex. I mean, it's definitely the wrong message to send out to all the young people. So.
Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see Becks on the front of our shirt, and I'd love to get the weekly cradle to the SK office, but...
I'm from Ireland, maybe I'm different. Guinness on my shirt would be quite nice.
Yeah. Do we have another
Thank you.
question out there? Yeah. Can you? Thank you.
Hi. I have a question when we're talking about morals with alcohol. What's the difference between getting Carlsberg as a sponsor compared to a betting company?
That's a good one. Well, as I said, drinking responsibility is the same as betting responsibility. We have play huge lottos on our website, so we're actually referring to a lotto company right now. From our perspective, we did work with smaller betting companies as well. We do have bwin, I think, advertisement on the website as well. The question is, does that morally put you in a corner or doesn't it? Betting nowadays is something everybody does, and you have to take care of what you do and how much money you spend. Of course, there's people getting into it, not getting out of it, losing all their money, losing everything, but we're not trying to advertise that. We're trying to advertise in a different direction. I don't see the real connection between a beer brand and a betting company, to be honest. And it also differs on where you come from. If you go to Croatia, for example, then betting it's just part of the lifestyle. That's what you do. In Germany, you bet as well. That's fine. And on the SK website, we try to give people the opportunity to bet on games without money behind. Still, if we have an advertisement, we would run it on the website because we think it's something we can do, and we think that it's common knowledge that people understand how to work with betting and not getting sucked into betting. I mean, if I took your discussion to the next level, I'd say I can't showcase World of Warcraft on my website because it gets people addictive as well. In some countries, in some cases. But the question is, does that affect my moral point of view? It doesn't. Beer, to me, it's a different scenario because if I go to a betting website, I need to have a credit card. So there's a lot of barriers for the 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds to get addicted, to get sucked into this, to lose money. You know what I mean? And if I go to beer, for example, then I have other barriers that I can try to use morally for me to say, okay, they will work as well. In terms of liquor, I mean, there's probably no country in the world where you can walk into a 15-year-old, 14-year-old and buy a bottle of 40% vodka. And it's the same for betting to some extent. Still, I do think personally that for SK Gaming, we shouldn't go into the direction of alcohol or nicotine, but betting, that's part of what we do as well. And I see the barrier lower than with alcohol. That's why we do it. I'm not sure if the point is totally clear to you, but I see the comparison, but I don't see it on the same level.
But I think can we just do one quick follow-up, because it's a really interesting point to raise as we're sort of still in the thick of the betting and gambling scandal that's been happening around StarCraft and the Korean scene. So I was actually wondering, what does that put teams, I mean, do you kind of have to deal with that internally? Do you have to does it change the public face? I mean, gambling on the website, a spectator confidence in matches. Have you guys had to sort of confront ramifications of that issue for yourselves yet?
There was a time when leagues and teams talked about this, especially in Germany, in the German Pro Series, because betting companies were pushing into this market, and we tried to find ways to address the problem before it actually happens, like making sure that our contracts with players have a paragraph that says you are not allowed to bet on games within your league, within your tournament. Of course, you can't control it 100%, but we try to take a lot of what the professional sport has activated and use it for esports before it actually was a big problem. Nowadays, with betting, I'm actually quite relaxed with it because the amounts of money put onto games where SK Gaming is involved, it's so tiny. No player would throw a match just for, I don't know, 20, 30 euro. I don't see that happening right now. And still, if it happened, we have ways to address it.
Any other thoughts on this issue?
Well, yeah, I mean, it happens everywhere. It happens in everything. I don't know if anyone's aware, but it's recently just come up in cricket. A couple of players have had to come forward to the sort of cricketing governing body and say, look, we were approached to fix bets and throw the match and whatever. It happened in snooker with Higgins. So yeah, as Alex said, as long as there's protocols in place in order to deal with this, be it banning the player. I think this goes on to another topic of governing bodies within esports. I think they should be able to control this better than teams would be able to, because you could kick a player from your team, but it's not going to stop him going over to maybe a different team. There are no restrictions in place for that, but a governing body could apply those restrictions and ban the players from playing in leagues and in professional teams. So that's one.
Has the G7 taken any stance on this in terms of? No cross. Okay. I think Henry had a. Can we pass the mic down? Thanks. Is there any WoW betting happening, Thomas? Do you?
What?
Is there any betting happening around WoW?
No, none at all.
No, not around arena play, like money matches or anything.
No, not that I know of. Yeah. Not in PPE at least.
Yes.
Henry Lowen from Stanford.
Is it on?
I don't know. Oh, now it's on,
Yeah.
I guess. Henry Lowen from Stanford. This may be very short because I don't know. I'm asking a question very much from a U.S. context, and it's another sponsorship question, and that has to do with military sponsorship. That is an issue in the U.S. a little bit, and I just wonder if any of you are doing that or have been approached about doing that, just to have, whether it be advertising or some other kind of relationship to the military in your countries.
Well, no, not as of yet, and I don't think I would do. But I can understand from the American standpoint, it has happened with America's Army, the game, and that was very much all intertwined with the US military. I mean, I've had people come to me and invite, like particularly my dad, for example, when I was working for Four Kings, he was saying, "Oh, why don't you get the military boots or military companies who try and get involved, because they would see it as a point of here's early recruitment." But I was completely against the idea. I'm from Northern Ireland. I've seen conflicts. It's not pretty, and I wouldn't advocate it at all.
I think it's something that doesn't match, to be honest. I mean, we call it e-sport, so we're very much looking at the competitive way of dealing with things like Team A versus Team B, and it's about who's the better team. Army, that's a total different thing. I see similarities in terms of, strategies to approach a goal. Yes, I do see that, but then again, we got to do our homework and be good at esports, and we shouldn't, talk to other people being good at taking spot A, taking spot B. I think it's very different because the one is a virtual environment, the other one is a real environment they need to be ready for. I mean, how could our players tell a squad leader from, I don't know, a SWAT team what to do when to capture a terrorist? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't see them giving us advice for a Counter-Strike team on the other hand side. So I don't see the similarity at all at this point, and I'm happy that, you know, the German army, for example, doesn't see us as a viable source for them and, you know, try to talk to us about it. I'm not saying I'm close to the argument, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't talk to them. Sure, I would talk to them, why not? But I don't see how we could help them in what we do.
Sorry. It is a very deep question, in fact, because following on from this, you know, we want to bring esports away from the video games are bad and they promote violence and they're killing simulators. We do not want to promote that at all. You know, we want to get away from that. All these crazy people talking that Counter-Strike breeds killers, because it doesn't. But you know, if you have a military sponsor, the argument goes the other way. So yeah, it's a very deep question and a very dangerous question, I think, in terms of, you know, violence in video games and how it proceeds in normal life. So I don't think there would ever be a situation where any responsible person would want a military sponsor for an esports team. I just think it would not.
Thomas, did you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it would make no sense at all for MMO gaming. I can see it being more of an issue, for example, in Counter-Strike where you use weapons and stuff like that, but for MMO, no, not at all.
It's funny though, because I mean, I don't know about you, Henry, but two things come to, I mean, of course, I'm thinking of the Korean Air Force, I think, has long sponsored their esports team, and I was also thinking about how WoW raiding is now so often touted as this, you know, you can learn teamwork and leadership and all of these things in WoW raiding guilds and take them out into the real world. So, yeah.
You know, one of the other things that's another issue here is that it's not so much that it's necessarily because it's a fighting game that the military would be interested, but because, you know, in the US we have voluntary military service. It's not mandatory. So it's almost like a lifestyle issue. You know, do you want to be in the military so that you would join the military? And the perception is that these games have the, you know, the lock and key for the late teenage males primarily who they're trying to recruit. So it's more of an association with you rather than necessarily the fact that you're playing a military game, you know, that sort of thing. And so that at that point, that's why the national context matters so much in this case. But that would be the approach I would expect, is at some point, if this is perceived as something that you really have a good hold on, an audience that you really have a good hold on, they might be interested in you more for just the association.
There's two different scenarios you got to look at. One is getting a sponsorship, and we as SK would not get a sponsorship from the US Army or the German Army or the Air Force or whatever, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit into our strategy. If the Army, on the other hand side, is booking advertisement for our US traffic, for the US visitors of the website, in terms of banner space, that's a different ballgame. And I can't control it. If they go through an agency and say, I want to book in 1 million page impressions a month on the SK website for the US traffic, then this is something they might do. You might see these banners on the website, but you won't see an active communication from SK Gaming saying, hey, you know, once your gaming career is over, or you didn't make it, probably the Army is a good testing field for you. You wouldn't see that.
I think it's less of an issue with, you mentioned the point about, you know, the South Korean Air Force. It is less of an issue there because their army is conscription based and military service is mandatory. So I think that it's a separate issue, I think.
Emma, were there any questions from the...
There's some, you might have touched on them a little bit already, but we'll throw them out there and see if you've got anything.
Oh yeah, and can we pass the mic back to you? Sorry, I can, yeah, thanks.
This is from the live stream, and we have one that asks about leadership panel. How have you yourselves learned leadership, and did you learn most of you self-reflection and questioning, analysing previous leaders or mentors, and do you now train others and assist leaders in succeeding them? And I'd like to add a little bit to that, especially to you, Thomas, with the Insidia ban that happened a little while ago. How, as a leader and as a player leading that, how do you manage that leadership in such a rocky terrain when you're sort of not really sure what's going to happen? So I don't know who wants to start first.
Yeah, well, the ban incident, that was really tough since it wasn't correct. No one in our guild thought the decision was correct. Basically, we got banned, we got a world first on a boss, and we got banned, so they kind of took the kill away from us. and we didn't really do anything wrong. It's just the game was, the code in the game was wrong basically. So when one of our members was using his normal DPS cycle, then something special happened in the fight which gave us an advantage. But we never did it on purpose, and for that we got all banned for a week. And most of our members, they wanted to quit, since, I mean, they were banning us from the game. We just play for fun.
I think for me, I mean, every event that I go to, or while I was working at Four Kings, was I was learning new things. You know, every sort of event, because I'm still pretty. You know, I don't have the experience of Alex, so every event brought something new for me to learn. So it was a learning experience. There was no teaching beforehand. It was very much thrown into the deep end as such. But you do have people that you work with who help you along, and I would certainly do that to people within the scene who are looking into management, and you sort of give them a bit of help and tell them the do's and don'ts really.
Well, we started quite early, so we had to kind of probably define the role here and there. We learned from each other, like guys who are in this business for 10 years now. But also, I personally try to take in all of the experience I can get from other fields. For example, I was sitting down with the German national coach for football last year in summer, just for dinner, and we were just talking. You know, in these 90 minutes, they can give you a lot in terms of, okay, what do you do in this situation, what do you do in that situation? I'm not particularly asking, but you know, the way Joachim Löw was talking to me, that was enough to learn from it. It's he's doing sports, I'm doing esports, and we're not at the same level whatsoever, but still he was teaching me stuff while just talking to me. And I try to read, listen, whatever I can see, okay, this might be an advantage, that's something we might use. I try to use it for myself to get better. Well, that's all I can say to that, actually. It's no long-term plan, it's not this strategy behind, it's just trial and error to some extent.
Maybe just to sort of wrapping up, I often think about how in esports, you have a lot of different kinds of people professionalizing themselves, right? Players becoming professional, admins taking on more and more professional roles. What's the big next sort of developmental push for people in your position professionalizing? What's the next step that has to happen in terms of team management, ownership? What's the growth area for you guys in your role in the scene?
I mean, right now we probably have a handful of full paid managers that can make their living out of running a team. And this needs to extend. People need to understand there are chances out there, there are brands, there are teams out there that need this role to be filled. You need to invest at some point from your own money, from your own time, to get this business to a level where you can say, okay, from now on, I am employed by my own company. I mean, we talk about how professional esports is nowadays, and it is very professional. But compared to where we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's not on a level where the actual sports professionalism is. That's not what I'm saying. So my point of view is we need more people that really try to work hard on getting into this position of being a manager. Try to find your way, go your way, do your mistakes, do the good things, grow. That's how it all develops. I mean, I've seen a lot of people coming into esports, leaving esports, but I've seen other people who I never thought they could grow into a managing role in their early 20s, and now mid-20s or end of the 20s. I think they are kick-ass. They are really, really, really good.
I think the teams have a responsibility on themselves to try and come up with a good business model, and not spend money on things that they shouldn't, and to act professionally and be a professional team, and with that will come more investment if they're doing a good job. If you're doing a good job, you will get the rewards. So there might be a fair bit of luck involved if some wealthy sugar daddy comes along and says, right, I'm going to buy up your team. But it's very, very important that you use the money wisely. MYM being a prime example. So yeah, you need to promote longevity. I think is very important. And yeah, we all want to make a massive living from esports, but the reality is it's not going to happen for a while. So you need to put in place the sort of model where you can stabilize yourself but grow at the same time at a steady pace. I think is important.
Thomas, how does this question look for you in terms of professionalizing your WoW play?
Yeah, well, it's very different for us. I mean, there's not really anyone getting paid for just playing the game. If you get paid, it's more to handle the community, to make sure you get visitors and things like that. So that's where you would expand, you know, do everything you can to get more people interested to the game, to the site.
In terms of investment, if I may, I don't believe in investments, in classical investment in esports right now at all, especially not in teams, because the business model is so dynamic and it changes from year to year that the real return on investment, it's not there right now. I think we need to develop the market 5-10 years in the future, and then probably we have one bigger economical vehicle whatsoever that is of interest for an investor. There are companies out there with investment, and I think leagues, tournaments, that's something that really works and can work in the future. But teams, I don't see that happening. I mean, and also it's a matter of expectations. I mean, the way media makers hit the market and what they did to the market long term, it was a bad thing to happen to esports, to happen to other teams, and the way we dealt it. I guess we all tried our best, like the Fanatics, the Four Kings, Mouse Sports, SK Gaming, all the teams out there. But still, it was the wrong approach. It put a lot of pressure onto esport. Expectations were high, and it was the same with the World of Warcraft thing going on. I mean, 2 years ago, Thomas and I would have a different discussion than we have nowadays, I guess. I mean, back then, if private people get into the market and say, I want to put some money into that because that's my hobby right now, like Arbaled is doing in the Eastern European scene, that's totally fine. And you know, that's the same thing happening in professional football. That's all right, but that's not a business model, not long term.
Yeah, I would completely agree, because you never really know when that investment is going to stop. And if you're relying on this as your main source, then you're going to be in big trouble, in very big trouble. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
I guess we've sort of already run out of time, so it's time for lunch. I want to thank you guys very much for the panel and joining us. And I think some of these issues too we can pick back up on during the open discussion as well, because there's a lot more to unpack about the finances. So we have a lunch break now. Speakers and the PhD course folks, we have lunch for you, but everybody can join us. Just the rest of you buy your lunch on the ground floor and then come up to the second floor of the cafeteria. So if, here down is the ground floor of the cafeteria. Second floor upstairs, we can all have lunch together. But there's a little set-aside part for the speakers. So, all right, and then we'll rejoin back here at 1:45.
So I talk myself